Hello, everyone. Welcome to this broadcast by Liberation Scotland. It's headed Liberation Explains because we've a lot to tell you about this evening. The first thing we want to talk about are the current elections which are underway. It's very, very important that people take part in these elections because we want the most representative committee Scotland can provide. And it's not just for the committee. There's going to be a whole range of new initiatives taking place in the months ahead with a various number of committees on different topics and subjects. And we need the best of Scotland to be part of it, to take part. So I would urge you to go onto the Liberation Scotland site, download the application form, either fill it in online and complete it there, or alternatively, if you feel more comfortable, download it and then, print it onto paper, complete it that way, and then post it in to the address we'll give you at the end of this broadcast. So please, please, please get involved. Scotland needs you. We need you now.
Well, why do we need a liberation movement? A liberation movement is always and only a response by a people who reject their nation's colonization. What's colonization? Well, let's start with what it's not. It's not a grievance. It's not a feeling of injustice or that we're treated just like a colony. Whether a nation is colonized isn't a matter of opinion, yours, mine, or any political figure or commentators. It's a matter of fact, of international law. A colony is a nation captured and exploited by a larger state or nation to the benefit of the colonizer and the detriment of the colonized. In the language of the United Nations, it is a non-self-governing territory and a people subject to a foreign sovereignty. And that is the true position of Scotland within the so-called United Kingdom of Great Britain. But what makes Scotland's position especially invidious is that this is not what the world at large has been led to believe. The vast majority of Scots have no idea that this is our situation, and our Scottish political establishment mostly rejects the whole idea. Scotland is a colony. Don't be ridiculous. Why? Because today Scotland's place in the UK and our rights as a nation are defined by a narrative produced by the Anglo-British state, that Scotland entered the Union as a voluntary partner, not as a dependency. In other words, we willingly partnered with England to co-create a new state, now called the United Kingdom of Great Britain. That narrative was produced for the purposes of self-justification and international propaganda. But so long as it continues to be accepted internationally and at home, it imprisons Scotland in the Union and denies us any right to restoration or restitution. It means that although we retain the right to self-determination, the right to change our minds and withdraw from the state we supposedly helped to establish, the rights of that state, such as the right to stability and security, are greater in international law than our right to dismantle it. In these circumstances, Scotland's withdrawal would have to be a matter of agreement and negotiation between the partner nations. A Scotland that failed to acknowledge the rights of the state it had created or failed to obtain its agreement to dissolve the Union would be unlikely to obtain the international recognition essential for any independent nation state. So there's much more involved than getting a referendum and saying, "See you later, England." In fact, independence begins to look like a near impossibility. But these are not our true circumstances. Scotland is not and never has been a partner nation. We entered a union based on the documented threat of invasion and the bribery or incarceration of our Scottish MPs. We entered the Union based on an unconstitutional manoeuvre by the English state to recognise the authority of the Scottish Parliament and monarch to act in opposition to the clearly expressed will of the Scottish majority, when that majority was and is the sovereign authority in Scotland. And this is expressly enshrined in Scots law by the Claim of Right Act of 1889. The state described in the partnership agreement we call the Treaty and Acts of Union, the one we were threatened, bribed and coerced into joining, has never come into existence. The one we were co-opted to instead, where English crown rights English feudal class-based constitutional traditions, English laws, language and culture have replaced our own, and even our own history has been suppressed and rewritten, is authorised by no treaty, no act of ratification, no agreement at all. Scotland is not a partner, but a dependency, a colony, wrongfully annexed, wrongfully exploited, and wrongfully controlled. And that means that we're not talking about the rights of a state created by two partners, but instead about the rights of an English state to control a nation in every respect without the benefit of any authority or agreement, and contrary to international law and obligations to which the so-called United Kingdom of Great Britain is signatory, versus the rights of the annexed nation of Scotland. Now the balance of rights and obligations changes in international law. The stability of the state of England with its colonised nations is balanced against the wrongful annexation of Scotland, the broken treaty, the plundering of Scotland's territorial resources, and the right of the nation of Scotland to restoration, self-determination, and control of our own resources. This is why Scotland must have a liberation movement, and why Liberation Scotland has 4 urgent tasks before it. To set the truth before the international community and shift the present international understanding of the true balance of rights and obligations. To pursue reparations for the wrongs done to this nation and the resources stolen by a foreign crown. To foster a political establishment in Scotland that champions the true constitutional rights of the people, especially popular sovereignty, as the route to self-determination and decolonisation, what we call independence, instead of buying into the colonisers' voluntary partnership fraud. There's no escape possible if you're a voluntary prisoner. To educate our own people, both about the real position of Scotland as a dependency and about our distinctly Scottish and still lawful constitutional rights.
Brexit proved that the Scottish nation is treated more or less as a colony, with Scots forcibly dragged out of the EU against their democratic will. The UK Supreme Court ruling that Scots are not permitted even to organise a referendum on independence, despite several electoral mandates in favour of a referendum, serves to reinforce our colonial status. Welsh and Irish nationalist movements have little doubt about their colonial status, but for some reason many Scots still believe we are not an oppressed people. This is despite half the Scottish population living in or close to poverty in what is a resource-rich nation. The Scots have been fed a narrative of a union of equals, which is difficult to comprehend whenever our 59 MPs or 9% of Westminster sovereignty is outvoted, which is all of the time. Colonialism is not that difficult to understand. Colonialism is first and foremost economic plunder. Everything is taken from the country cheaply: oil and gas, energy, aggregates, food, whiskey, with goods sold back to the native population at higher cost. The role of a colony is primarily to serve the needs of the mother country, in this case, England. Colonialism involves external political control and is always a cooperative venture with native elites. These elites assume the culture and language of the colonial power, as well as its ideology and values, and help manage the territory in the colonizer's interest. Another aspect of colonialism is settler occupation from the mother country. The largest in-migration of any ethnic group into Scotland over the past century and more has been people from England, and oriented towards the professional and managerial class, according to census records. All the best jobs in Scotland are and have historically been advertised mainly in the London press, and the only linguistic requirement in Scotland is the English language. Scotland has also been subject to population displacement, initially through genocide and clearances after the mid-1700s. This was followed by over a century of state-sponsored transportation and emigration of Scots to England's overseas colonies. The Scottish Army is deployed in some 150 imperial armed conflicts. The result was a loss of around 4 million Scots, one of the largest losses of population in Europe for a country of our size and population. Another feature of colonialism is cultural assimilation. Here, a supposedly superior culture, which includes only the values, history, heritage, and language of the colonial power, replaces that of the native people. In a colonial environment, it is only the values of the colonizer that are sovereign. The colonized nation is effectively out of the game internationally and in terms of history. An Anglophone unionist cultural hegemony, which includes native elites, controls the territory in the colonizer's interest. Cultural assimilation leads to institutionalized sociolinguistic prejudice, inequality, and development of what we know as internalized racism within the minds of an oppressed people. Only the language of the colonizer opened the doors of opportunity, while the language of the colonized, which is not taught, is deemed invalid and made subordinate, as are those who continue to speak it. The outcome is manifest in a people holding a colonial mindset, and what we know as the Scottish cultural cringe. This is a psychological condition which develops in an oppressed people a feeling of self-hatred, a belief that they are incapable of running their own affairs, and who even reject their own liberation. Colonialism is therefore mainly about economic and political exploitation, but it also involves cultural control mechanisms. The exploitation of a people and their land by another culture leaves the nation and its people underdeveloped and marginalised, which continues to be the reality in Scotland today. There are only two main protagonists in post-colonial theory, that is, the coloniser and the colonised. This reality is somewhat obscured in that colonised elites also become colonialists through adopting the coloniser's ideology and values and end up oppressing their own people. Peoples in self-determination conflict are invariably linguistically divided. The Scots, who are deprived of learning their own languages, are no different. The formation of an independence movement depends on the solidarity of the oppressed ethnic group, in this instance mainly Scots language speakers. In a colonial society, there are only two possible outcomes. Either the people secure independence, which is decolonisation and liberation from oppression, which includes self-recovery of native culture, languages and sovereignty, or economic exploitation, cultural assimilation and oppression will continue, in which case the native culture, language and national identity ultimately perish, and the nation with it.
So you may be watching this and saying to yourself, surely liberation can't do everything that Sarah and Alf have outlined. Well, there will be other people, other important initiatives taking place. Indeed, some are underway already within the independence movement. Scotland's liberation and achievement of self-determination requires a bringing together a broad gathering of society, civic and civil, democratically elected reps, people's assemblies and conventions. If you're to move peacefully and democratically towards constitutional change, the people of Scotland need to plan and shape our future, our governance, our political rights. We need to decide on the form of democracy we want to introduce in an independent Scotland. We must be able to do this free from Westminster's interference, be it political, legal, corporate, military, media, and free from the colonial controls and mechanisms which are slowly destroying our nation. We need to move forward by enacting the sovereignty of the people. And thanks to the work of Salvo and Liberation to date, there's a growing understanding within Scotland of our constitutional rights under Scots law and under international law. But this understanding needs to be greater and needs to take hold in and across all the communities of this our wonderful realm. Also, internationally, there needs to be a greater understanding of and a tangible support for our constitutional status. That is our right to self-determination under our own constitution and international law. Restoration of popular sovereignty in real terms for Scotland is now a matter of international law, and it's likely to draw considerable international support politically with a well-planned diplomatic and media campaign. International recognition and support of Scotland's status will help reset the political climate domestically. Domestically, as outlined by Alf, it's important to overcome our current difficulties and prepare sound policies and plans for Scotland's future. These plans must be driven and shaped by the people, by our communities, and not by elements of the establishment, the elite, or politically preferred advisors. We need to start on these now and not wait for our elected politicians. We need to inform them, and they need to listen, and they need to act. Groups and networks within the independence movement are beginning to work together across party political boundaries to start planning so we can put in place new foundations for Scotland's future. These groups and communities need to be able to draw from the best of the expertise and knowledge that exists across Scotland. Some of that expertise and knowledge you see tonight with Sarah and Alf and other colleagues within the liberation movement and beyond. I take Tim Rideout on the Currency Group and Andy Whiteman on land reform and others recognised by many in Scotland as experts in their fields. We need their advice on the options that will help us in our liberation movement. Members of the liberation movement can influence the way these plans take shape, drawing from our distinctive Scottish values and traditions. What are they? Well, I could list them, but I won't bore you because you probably know them, but maybe some people don't recognise them. But we certainly need a new focus on the common good. And we need more direct and more regular involvement by people and communities in the democratic process, as we did before for many, many years. However, at the end of the day, the liberation as a movement is only one part, and now a very important part, of what I regard as the unstoppable force that is now growing within our nation. Liberation has no political aspirations to govern, and when our objectives are realised and Scotland is free, the Liberation Scotland Committee that we are shortly about to elect will stand down, having completed their task, and it will be for the people and their newly elected democratic government to deliver Scotland's future.
Thank you, John. So, to round off our broadcast this evening, I just want to stress to you just how unique and important these elections that are currently underway really are. To become part of the leadership of a political party normally involves all sorts of internal deals over a period of time. This is a genuine election. There is no favoured sons or daughters. This is an election where every single member of Liberation can become part of that committee. Can you imagine in future generations of your own family the pride if they can say, well, my dad or my grandfather was part of that team that brought about the circumstances where Scotland could get free. This is a unique opportunity we're offering to all members of Liberation. Please go to the website, fill in the form, or alternatively download it, fill it in manually and post it back to John Henry. There's a post office box available and an address on the Liberation website. Please do it. We need your support. It's not just this one committee. There's going to be lots of different committees and initiatives taking place in the next few months. We need you, and we need you now. Please. Now, I know some people may be a bit worried, a bit fear and trepidation about taking part in such an important committee. Please don't feel that way. It's very different from normal politics. We actually like each other. So please come and join. Please come and join our organisation. Thank you.